At Thanksgiving dinner, my billionaire grandpa looked me dead in the eye and said, "Glad you're enjoying the college fund." Everyone laughed except me. Because I wasn't in college anymore. I'd dropped out months ago. And what none of them knew? Grandpa's fund was about to make me richer than any of them. If you've ever been underestimated or looked down on by your own family, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'd love to know your story. Now, let's dive into how I turned a Thanksgiving insult into the sweetest revenge. Growing up a Carver meant living in the shadow of wealth. My grandpa, Henry Carver, was a self-made billionaire. Oil, real estate, you name it, he had his hands in everything. He loved to brag that he built his empire with bare hands. But honestly, by the time I came around, it was less empire building and more empire managing. Thanksgiving dinners at the Carver mansion were legendary. Long marble table, crystal glasses, chandeliers. It felt like walking into a scene from Succession. And every year, Grandpa would sit at the head, carving the turkey like some monarch surveying his kingdom. Except, his kingdom was also our family, and he ruled it with pride and control. My dad, Stephen, was the perfect heir, business degree, loyal, ambitious. My mom played the elegant, quiet wife. My sister, Alyssa, was Grandpa's golden girl, Stanford graduate, polished, poised, the kind of woman who posted grateful quotes on Instagram while looking down her nose at everyone else. Then there was me, Ethan Carver, the family disappointment. I wasn't dumb, I just didn't want to play their game. While Alyssa interned at Fortune 500 companies, I spent nights building apps in my dorm room. Coding felt like freedom. It wasn't about money, it was about creating something from nothing. But to my family, if it didn't have a degree or a tie, it wasn't real success. I lasted 1 year in college. 1 year of pretending I cared about business classes that taught me how to maximize shareholder value. 1 year of listening to my dad remind me that Grandpa was paying for my tuition. 1 year of hearing Alyssa brag about her internships and future leadership potential. Then, one night, I snapped. I was sitting in my dorm, staring at my grades mediocre, not because I couldn't do better, but because I just didn't care anymore. I had a prototype for a social media app I'd been working on with 2 friends. It was clunky but promising. Something in me whispered, "This is it. Walk away." So I did. I dropped out. When I told my family, the silence was radioactive. Dad slammed his fist on the table. "You ungrateful idiot. Do you realize what Grandpa's paying for you? You're throwing it all away." Alyssa smirked, sipping her wine like it was a scene from some soap opera. "Well," she said, "not everyone's cut out for higher education." Mom said nothing, just sighed. And Grandpa? He looked at me like I was some disappointing investment. "You'll regret this, boy," he said, his voice cold. "Education is the one thing they can't take away." I wanted to tell him I didn't need his money. But the truth? At that time, I did. After dropping out, I moved into a small apartment with my 2 friends, Leo and Mark. Rent was cheap because the place smelled like mold and despair. We pooled our savings, ate ramen, and worked like maniacs on our startup idea, a digital event platform that helped small creators monetize local meetups. No one believed in us, especially not my family. Every few months, I'd get a call from Mom asking if I'd come to my senses. Alyssa would drop by to check on me, posting photos of my dingy apartment with captions like, "Humble beginnings." But the worst was Grandpa. He'd occasionally send cryptic emails like, "Have you reconsidered your education yet?" As if he was watching from a throne, waiting for me to crawl back. We launched the first version of the app 6 months later. It flopped. Then, out of nowhere, a small YouTuber used it for a fan meetup, and the event went viral. Overnight, downloads skyrocketed. We scrambled to handle the traffic, sleeping 2 hours a night. By year's end, we had over 200,000 users. Then came an acquisition offer, $4.5 million, from a mid-tier tech company. We were stunned. I took my share, reinvested it, and launched another app, this time smarter, leaner, focused on digital community management. Within 2 years, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Quietly. No flashy cars, no bragging, just silent growth. And my family? They thought I was still that dropout wasting Grandpa's money. Fast forward to last year's Thanksgiving. The Carver mansion looked the same. Polished, pretentious, perfect. I hadn't been back in 2 years, but Mom begged me to come. It would mean so much to your grandfather, she said. So I showed up, jeans, hoodie, no watch, no suit. Alyssa arrived in a $6,000 dress, her fiancé in tow. Grandpa wore his usual 3-piece suit, with that smug look that said, "I know everything." We sat down to dinner. The usual small talk, Alyssa talking about her promotion, Grandpa asking about the markets. Then, right before dessert, Grandpa raised his glass. "To family," he said, "and to the ones who make us proud." Everyone clinked glasses. Then he turned to me. His smile sharpened. "And to you, Ethan," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Glad you're enjoying the college fund." The table erupted in laughter. Even Mom chuckled awkwardly. Alyssa snorted into her wine. I just sat there, hands cold, jaw tight. Because the college fund he was mocking? It was the seed money he'd set aside for my tuition. But when I dropped out, Dad had kept what was left, $45,000 for future education. They assumed I had nothing. And yet, the startup I'd built from scratch had just been valued at $30 million. But I said nothing. Not yet. I smiled, raised my glass, and said, "Thanks, Grandpa. I really am enjoying it." The look he gave me said he thought I was being sarcastic. But he had no idea how literal that line was. After that Thanksgiving humiliation, I decided I wasn't going to lash out. I'd outplay them. Revenge, I realized, didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be poetic. Over the next few months, I expanded my company Luminet into event sponsorships. We specialized in high-end networking conferences, exactly the type Grandpa's company, Carver Holdings, loved sponsoring. I had an idea. If I could get Carver Holdings involved without them realizing who owned Luminet, I could turn the tables. Through a few business connections, I reached their events coordinator. We pitched a sponsorship partnership for a major tech conference. The proposal went through and was approved. Grandpa's company had no clue I was behind it. They wired us a $250,000 sponsorship fee directly from Carver Holdings to my startup. I stared at the transaction for a long time, laughing to myself. The same man who mocked me for wasting his money had just paid me more than he ever gave for my education. But I wasn't done. 3 months later, the conference went live, Las Vegas Grand Ballroom, 3,000 attendees. Carver Holdings had a premium booth, and Grandpa himself attended, all smiles, shaking hands, bragging about Carver's involvement in the future of tech. He had no idea he was standing under a banner that read, "Sponsored by Luminet." At the closing gala, I took the stage as keynote speaker. My name flashed on the giant screen. Ethan Carver, CEO of Luminet. The moment his eyes met the screen, I saw it, the flicker of disbelief, the frozen jaw, the silent recognition. Alyssa was beside him, jaw open. Dad blinked like he'd seen a ghost. I started my speech. "A few years ago," I said, "someone told me education is the one thing they can't take away. But what they didn't mention is that belief in yourself, that's something no one can give or take away either." The audience clapped. I didn't need to look at Grandpa to know he was fuming. Afterward, he approached me, trying to mask his shock. "You could have told me," he said stiffly. "You could have believed in me," I replied. Then I smiled. "But hey, thanks for sponsoring the event." The color drained from his face. A year later, Thanksgiving rolled around again. This time, I arrived at the mansion in a tailored suit, driving a Tesla Plaid. Alyssa had just broken off her engagement, and Grandpa's company was struggling, bad investments, declining stocks. Dinner was smaller, quieter. The confidence in the air had turned brittle. Midway through the meal, Grandpa cleared his throat. "I heard you've done well for yourself," he said. I nodded. "Luminet's doing okay. We just acquired a media company, actually." He raised his eyebrows. "Media company?" I smirked. "Yeah, Carver Media, I think it's called." The table went dead silent. Because yes, using a holding company, I'd bought out one of his smaller subsidiaries that he'd neglected to renew properly. It wasn't his biggest asset, but it carried the Carver name. And now, legally, I owned it. He just stared, speechless. Alyssa's fork hit the plate. I leaned back, calm, collected. "Guess I finally made good use of that college fund," I said. Mom tried to hide her smile. Dad just looked down, shaking his head. Grandpa didn't speak the rest of the meal. Weeks later, I got an email from him. No subject line, just one sentence. "Proud of what you've built. H.C." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was something. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the black sheep. I felt like someone who'd carved his own path. And the best part? I never shouted, never gloated, never rubbed it in their faces. I let success do all the talking. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't proving them wrong, it's proving yourself right. If you've ever been laughed at, underestimated, or told you'd fail, remember this story. You don't need to scream your worth. Just build it quietly until the world can't ignore it. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this revenge, and tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen come full circle? Subscribe for more stories like this, where karma finally catches up.